discover the hidden contours of the Mellon family's remarkable rise, a saga that begins with Thomas Mellon, an enterprising Scots-Irish immigrant who laid the groundwork for Mellon Bank. From there, his sons Andrew and Richard amassed a staggering fortune through strategic investments in Gulf oil, Alcoa, Koppers, and beyond, cementing the Mellons as one of America's wealthiest dynasties. Alongside storied philanthropy, think the National Gallery of Art and Carnegie Mellon University, lurk shadows of controversy, from tax fraud allegations to personal struggles that echo the scandals of other legendary clans, like the Astors and Onassises. How did a family once pivotal to the Roaring Twenties navigate both towering success and whispered secrets? Delve into the Mellons' intertwining legacies of ambition, influence, and intrigue, from new money to old money. Let me take you on a journey through the Mellon family's evolution from new money upstarts to entrenched old money elite, a story that, at first glance, might seem straightforward but actually runs deep with twists, triumphs, setbacks, and fascinating links to major historical moments. Trust me, this tale has it all. Industrial booms in Pittsburgh, comparisons to European aristocracies, philanthropic ventures that rival the Rockefellers and Carnegies, and even the occasional legal scandal. By the end of this account, you'll see how the Mellon name ascended from modest immigrant roots to one of the most iconic and long-standing fortunes in America, all while leaving a complex trail of controversies and achievements that continue to captivate historians, financial experts, and everyday curious minds alike. The Mellon family narrative starts with Thomas Mellon, an immigrant from County Tyrone in Ireland, who arrived in Pennsylvania in the early 19th century. Unlike families that trace their wealth all the way back to colonial land grants or British nobility, the Mellons didn't come from that sort of background. Instead, Thomas Mellon saw an opportunity in America's rapid industrial and infrastructural expansion, particularly in Pittsburgh, which was poised to become a cornerstone of the U.S. economy thanks to its steel mills and river trade. According to various local histories and newspaper archives, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the New York Times among them, Pittsburgh in the mid-1800s was bustling with entrepreneurs who spotted opportunities in finance, manufacturing, and transportation. Thomas Mellon's journey very much echoed that of Andrew Carnegie, another Scots-Irish immigrant who would build a steel empire in the same city. Carnegie was new money, rising from a poor background to become one of the richest individuals in the world. In the same vein, Thomas Mellon's banking venture, which eventually became T. Mellon & Sons, was initially seen as fresh wealth. That kind of upstart reputation often clung to the Mellons in the early days. Yet the Mellon story isn't just about founding a bank. By the time Thomas Mellon was laying the groundwork for his financial institution, he was already developing a reputation as a savvy judge and lawyer. Sources like the New York Times have pointed out that Thomas's legal background allowed him to understand both the intricacies of real estate transactions and the potential pitfalls of unregulated business practices. This insight became especially important during Pittsburgh's industrial boom, when speculation ran rampant and fortunes could be made or lost practically overnight. Thomas Mellon's willingness to embrace calculated risks differentiated him from other local bankers and law professionals, many of whom hesitated to invest in emerging industries. This calculated boldness later became a hallmark of the Mellon family's approach to investment. After laying the family's financial foundation, Thomas Mellon passed the torch to his heirs, most notably Andrew W. Mellon, who was born in 1855, and Richard B. Mellon, born in 1858. And here's where we see the transition from that original new money status into something approaching the prestige and power of old money. Andrew and Richard took the seeds Thomas planted, Pittsburgh banking wealth, and channeled them into a sprawling empire. According to the New York Times and Forbes, Andrew Mellon invested heavily in Gulf Oil, Alcoa, Westinghouse, and other ventures, mirroring what John D. Rockefeller did in building a diversified portfolio that included oil, banking, and railroads. People who track family dynasties often compare the Mellon investment approach to that of Rockefeller, because both families realized early on that relying on one industry, even a massive one like steel or oil, left them vulnerable to economic downturns. By spreading out their wealth across multiple sectors, they ensured their fortunes would endure through financial shifts and changes in consumer demand. Now, the Mellon family's philanthropic endeavors are as grand as their bank accounts, and they bear an uncanny resemblance to the philanthropic pursuits of Andrew Carnegie, whose name is all over libraries in the United States and the UK. Specifically, Andrew W. Mellon poured resources into founding the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, which to this day gives out substantial annual grants, some $200 million, according to The Guardian. That's a striking sum, especially when you realize that many foundations started by wealthy individuals tend to scale back after a generation or two, or else they fragment into smaller charitable entities managed by heirs with divergent interests. Not so for the Mellons. Their foundation remains a big player in the nonprofit sector, supporting everything from arts programs to higher education initiatives. Their philanthropic footprint also includes the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., an institution that Andrew Mellon helped establish by donating a world-class collection of art and providing funds for the construction of the museum's original building. Sources like the official National Gallery of Art website and Smithsonian Magazine chronicle how this move was reminiscent of Carnegie's creation of public libraries, both philanthropic gestures aimed at broadening public access to cultural and educational resources. Andrew Mellon's role in U.S. politics further cemented the family's move from new money outsiders to old money insiders. He served as Treasury Secretary from 1921 to 1932 under Presidents Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. During this period, Andrew Mellon was instrumental in shaping tax policy, and his economic philosophies significantly influenced the Roaring Twenties, a decade often associated with aggressive stock market speculation, the rise of consumer culture, and widespread optimism about America's economic future. According to historical analyses from the Washington Post and academic studies on the Treasury Department, Mellon's approach was somewhat akin to cutting top income tax rates to spur economic growth, though critics argued that it disproportionately favored the wealthy. His tenure was not without controversy. Some historians draw a loose parallel to the Habsburg monarchy's use of electoral bribes to maintain power, suggesting Mellon's policies were designed to perpetuate the influence of a wealthy elite. Whether that's a fair comparison or not, there's no doubt that Andrew Mellon's time as Treasury Secretary left a profound mark on the U.S. financial landscape. Even after he resigned, echoes of his economic ideology continued to shape fiscal debates for decades. One of the reasons the Mellons managed to preserve their wealth across generations, unlike some families that lose it all after a single generation of mismanagement or extravagance, is their use of family trusts. According to Forbes, the Mellon trusts are structured in a way that helps mitigate tax liabilities and ensures that the fortune gets passed down in a relatively intact form. Critics sometimes argue that such structures benefit heirs, who haven't necessarily earned their wealth, but supporters point out that these trusts can fund philanthropic work, maintain important cultural institutions, and help stabilize family-led companies. These trusts place the Mellons in the same camp as the DuPonts and the Cavendish family, the Dukes of Devonshire, known for meticulously preserving their assets through trust arrangements and careful financial planning. This strategy stands in stark contrast to the Vanderbilt family, which famously depleted a massive fortune over a few generations through lavish spending, lack of investment strategy, and internal family rifts. Still, for all their prestige and philanthropic achievements, the Mellons never fully escaped the new money stigma, likely because of the tax scandals and eccentric heirs that occasionally popped up in the press. You might recall, for instance, that William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper magnate, also suffered from a certain reputation tied to controversies within his media empire and personal life. The Mellons, by comparison, had to navigate legal battles and investigations into tax evasion, with Andrew Mellon himself facing accusations, though ultimately these charges didn't result in the sort of dramatic downfall that some had predicted. But episodes like these, well documented by newspapers of record, including the New York Times, fueled whispers that perhaps the Mellon wealth wasn't as impeccable or respectable as the old guard might prefer. If we shift our focus to the concrete assets that built and sustained the Mellon fortune, we see a diverse portfolio that at one point was estimated at $12 to $14.1 billion, a staggering sum, especially considering these valuations and references come from multiple reputable sources, including Forbes. The Mellon portfolio encompassed banking. Mellon Bank, now known as BNY Mellon after a merger with the Bank of New York, was reported in the New York Times to have $5.8 billion in assets around 1971. Over time, this institution grew into a global financial giant with a massive presence in asset management and custodial services, maintaining the Mellon name even though it merged with another banking powerhouse. BNY Mellon is sometimes viewed as one of the oldest banking corporations in the U.S., tying into a tradition of stable institutions like J.P. Morgan and Wells Fargo. Historians note that this stability is part of what conferred old money status on the Mellons. Industry, Gulf Oil, Alcoa, and Koppers formed the industrial backbone of the Mellon family fortune. Gulf Oil, sold in 1984 for a substantial $13.3 billion, was once one of the so-called Seven Sisters, major oil companies that dominated the global petroleum industry. Alcoa, in which the Mellons reportedly held a 21% stake, was crucial not just for building wealth but also for shaping entire sectors of manufacturing, from automobile parts to aerospace components. Meanwhile, Koppers, a company specializing in carbon compounds and chemicals, was partially owned, 20%, by the Mellon interests, signaling their willingness to delve into a range of industrial sectors. Forbes articles often highlight how the Mellons were adept at identifying industries with long-term growth potential, especially in an age when heavy industry was the backbone of the American economy. Philanthropy. The Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, valued around $697 million back in 1970, a figure cited in The Guardian, has grown in influence over the decades, awarding grants that shape cultural and academic landscapes. Meanwhile, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., remains a living testament to the Mellons' dedication to the arts. Critics have often pointed out that philanthropy on this scale can serve as a way for wealthy families to secure a positive public image or a form of legacy building. Yet it's also undeniable that these gifts have enriched cultural life in the United States, akin to how the Carnegies built libraries or how the Rockefellers invested in the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA. Real estate. Oak Spring Farms in Virginia is one of the more recognizable Mellon properties, famous for its library of rare books and manuscripts on horticulture and botany. According to Business Insider, the Mellons also own or have owned numerous Pittsburgh properties and other estates in various states, reflecting the broader pattern of real estate investment among America's wealthy families. Compare this to the Onassis family's real estate ventures or the property portfolios of certain European aristocrats, and you'll see that the Mellons employed real estate both for personal usage and as a means of further diversifying their wealth. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Over time, tax disputes chipped away at some of the Mellon fortune, even as strategic legal structures attempted to shelter it. This dynamic has parallels with other notable families, such as the shipping tycoon Aristotle Onassis, whose fortune was famously volatile due to industry fluctuations and personal controversies. While the Mellons did not experience the same roller coaster of maritime markets, their experiences with shifting tax laws, philanthropic obligations, and public scrutiny created hurdles that occasionally threatened to reduce their total net worth. In some respects, they mirrored the Cavendish family, the Dukes of Devonshire, in the UK, who have long battled inheritance taxes and property maintenance costs, offset by well-timed estate planning. The Mellons, for their part, managed to hold on to enough assets to keep their legacy robust into the 21st century. Andrew Mellon's tax evasion scandal. In the mid-1930s, the Great Depression is raging. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal policies are shaking up the American economy, and one of the wealthiest men in the country, Andrew W. Mellon, is about to face a scandal that could ruin his reputation. This isn't just another story of rich versus poor or left versus right politics. It's the gripping tale of a man who helped shape the Roaring Twenties and then found himself accused of hiding millions in fake deductions. Before we dive head, Thomas was a savvy investor and lawyer, and his new money banking empire in Pittsburgh grew alongside the city's steel mills and factories. Andrew took that seed money and branched out into an impressive array of ventures, investing heavily in Gulf Oil, Alcoa, and other major companies that would dominate the American economy. Over time, Andrew and his brother Richard became emblematic of not just new money, but a transition to old money status, thanks to diversified investments, political influence, and philanthropic endeavors. By the 1920s, Andrew Mellon was so influential, he served as Treasury Secretary under 3 consecutive presidents, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. In that role, he championed tax policies that, depending on your point of view, either fueled the spectacular growth of the Roaring Twenties or unfairly favored the wealthy. It's not unlike the controversies swirling around other powerful families of the day, or even the modern debates over whether billionaire-friendly tax breaks spur economic development or simply entrench inequality. So, how did this major player in American finance and politics end up in the crosshairs of a tax evasion scandal? The Guardian, among other reputable newspapers, reports that in 1935, the Roosevelt administration accused Mellon of hiding millions of dollars through fraudulent deductions. Now keep in mind that by this time, Franklin D. Roosevelt was well into his first term as president, orchestrating New Deal reforms to combat the Great Depression. Mellon's policies from the 1920s were out of favor. There were certainly plenty of people on the left, and even some centrists, who believed Mellon had contributed to the speculative frenzy that led to the crash of 1929. Given Mellon's deep connections to Republican administrations of the past, some historians argue that the charges were tinged with political motives. Whether that's true or not remains hotly debated. The core allegations boiled down to this: Did Andrew Mellon deliberately mask his true income by claiming phony deductions, funneling money through complex partnerships or shell companies, and thereby defrauding the Internal Revenue Service, IRS? The government believed so, and the press had a field day. Headlines blared about the supposed duplicity of a man who had once been America's most powerful economic policymaker. According to certain sources, including archived documents cited in academic works about Roosevelt's IRS, the government's legal team posited that Mellon's philanthropic giving might have been structured in a way that simultaneously enhanced his public image and shielded large chunks of wealth from taxes. It's a potent accusation, one that drew parallels to other high-profile controversies, such as John D. Rockefeller's philanthropic spree following the Ludlow Massacre, a tragic labor conflict in Colorado, during which Rockefeller's family infused money into charitable causes to rehabilitate its name. In Mellon's case, the spotlight fell on his massive art collection. Many observers at the time saw the donation of this collection as an astonishing act of generosity and patriotism. And to be fair, it was. Mellon's gift became the cornerstone of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Today, that museum stands as a hallmark of American culture, visited by millions each year. Mellon's donation encompassed masterpieces by the likes of Raphael, Botticelli, and Rembrandt, works that shaped the museum's reputation as a global treasure trove. But lurking behind the praise were whisperings that Mellon offered up these priceless artworks as a strategic maneuver, a distraction or a bargaining chip to sway public opinion and possibly even the legal or political outcome of his case. Some newspapers of the era called it the tycoon who dodged taxes with art, a sensational phrase that has lingered in pop culture accounts of the scandal. There's a historical precedent for this kind of maneuver, and it stretches all the way back to the Renaissance. The Medici family, who started as bankers in Florence, famously cultivated alliances with the church, funded artistic works, and in some cases, navigated murky waters of corruption to solidify their power. The Medicis managed to place multiple family members on the papal throne and weathered numerous allegations of financial impropriety. How? Well, partly by underwriting grand public works and religious projects that showcase their generosity. Mellon's critics then and now sometimes cast him as a modern-day Medici, a financial wizard who used cultural patronage to launder his image or potentially launder money. On the American front, Andrew Carnegie provides another intriguing parallel. Carnegie penned The Gospel of Wealth, a short but impactful essay that championed the responsibility of the rich to use their fortunes for the betterment of society. Historians have pointed out that Carnegie's text was, at least in part, ghostwritten, and it served as a powerful tool to quell criticisms that his steel empire underpaid workers. Much like Carnegie, Mellon positioned himself as a benefactor of the arts and education. He also funded numerous scientific and cultural endeavors beyond the National Gallery. When the Roosevelt administration slapped Mellon with charges of tax fraud, some saw parallels to Carnegie's scenario, an ultra-rich industrialist trying to guide public narrative by flaunting philanthropic generosity. But let's not skip an essential detail. The charges against Mellon are factual in that the government genuinely did investigate him for tax evasion, and official documents confirm that a formal case was filed. The debate arises over whether the Roosevelt administration manipulated the IRS and the justice system for political retaliation. On that front, the historical community remains split. Some argue that Roosevelt or his top lieutenants viewed Mellon as the embodiment of the old guard that had led America into financial ruin. Others claim Roosevelt was simply doing his job, ensuring that even the wealthiest citizens paid their fair share during a national crisis. There are references, though not always conclusive, to Roosevelt's correspondence and internal memos that could shed light on whether Mellon's prosecution was orchestrated for maximum political impact. According to certain historians who have combed through archives at the Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library, there are no smoking gun letters explicitly stating we must target Andrew Mellon for political gain. However, that doesn't stop conspiracy theories from swirling. Indeed, there's an entire subgenre of research that focuses on X claims of conspiracy related to the Mellons, the Roosevelts, and big government interference in private industry. Various forums, blogs, and even articles in the Washington Post have mentioned these rumors over the years, but few have found concrete proof that Roosevelt singled out Mellon solely for political revenge. The general scholarly consensus is that Mellon was a prime target because he was both a high-profile figure and had, in the view of the administration, enough financial complexity to merit close scrutiny. Whether personal vendettas also played a role is still up for debate. The files from that period remain a treasure trove for researchers looking to piece together motivations and behind-the-scenes maneuvering. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of this story is that Mellon, who died in 1937, never got to see the ultimate resolution of the case. He was acquitted posthumously, meaning that by the time a final judgment cleared his name of criminal wrongdoing, he was already gone. For many of his contemporaries, it raised questions about the fairness of a prolonged legal battle against a man in his twilight years. Had Mellon been alive for the acquittal, would public opinion have changed enough to rehabilitate him in real time? It's one of those great what-ifs in American history. While Mellon dodged a guilty verdict, the scandal inevitably tarnished his reputation. Public memory is fickle. Some revere him as the generous patron who gave America one of its finest art museums. Others remember him as the Treasury Secretary who championed low taxes for the wealthy, only to get caught up in his own alleged tax evasion scheme. The truth, as is often the case, is more complicated than either simple narrative. Matthew Mellon's hidden crypto fortune. While the Mellon name immediately conjures images of 19th century Pittsburgh banking, gargantuan investments in oil and aluminum, philanthropic legacies like the National Gallery of Art, and even a high-profile tax scandal involving Andrew Mellon, the twist here is pure 21st century intrigue. Instead of building wealth through railroads, steel, or 1920s-era finance, Matthew Mellon reportedly made his fortune in cryptocurrency, specifically Ripple XRP. By the time of his untimely passing in 2018, rumors abounded that he had stashed a staggering $1 billion worth of XRP in hidden accounts, protected by codes he kept tucked away in U.S. bank vaults. Then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. So what happened to that digital treasure? If you've been following the broader Mellon story, you'll recognize a family not unaccustomed to both triumph and scandal. Thomas Mellon, the family's founding patriarch, arrived from County Tyrone, Ireland, and built a fledgling banking empire that would eventually become T. Mellon and Sons. Andrew Mellon, Thomas's son, famously served as U.S. Treasury Secretary under multiple presidents, cementing the clan's transition from so-called new money to old money. Of course, Andrew Mellon also became embroiled in his own drama, accused of tax evasion in 1935, though posthumously acquitted. Further down the line, Mellons made headlines for philanthropic endeavors on a grand scale, sponsoring the arts, establishing foundations, and ensuring their name graced everything from university buildings to museum wings. Indeed, the Mellon name grew to symbolize a certain brand of American aristocracy, shaped by philanthropic largesse and well-timed investments in industries like Gulf Oil and Alcoa. Enter Matthew Mellon II, a descendant of this dynasty, whose personal journey stood in stark contrast to those who preceded him. While most of the older Mellons earned their place in the public eye through the steel and oil booms of America's industrial age, and of course their philanthropic footprints, Matthew took a more contemporary route: cryptocurrency. He had the Mellon taste for financial risk, but he applied it to an entirely new playing field. Reports from outlets like Medium, Forbes, and even social media chatter hinted that Matthew Mellon jumped in early on the crypto craze, a move that netted him an almost unbelievable sum. We're talking a claimed $1 billion in Ripple, XRP, stored in private digital wallets that only he could access. He was known for living large, too. He frequented top-tier events, brushed shoulders with the elite of both old money and new tech, and fueled a swirl of headlines that cast him as a charismatic yet mercurial figure. But that flamboyant image masked deeper concerns. Friends, acquaintances, and some of his own statements suggested paranoia about hackers and a fear that unscrupulous parties might try to force him to reveal his crypto keys. According to a Medium article that cited multiple people close to him, Matthew Mellon went as far as dispersing his XRP access codes across several bank vaults throughout the United States, presumably to foil would-be thieves. If anyone wanted to get their hands on his holdings, they'd need to collect codes from multiple locations, a puzzle so complex it resembled something out of a spy novel. In a family long used to fortress-like trusts and intricate estate structures, remember, the Mellons were famed for preserving wealth across generations through careful legal planning. Matthew's approach seemed both innovative and perhaps a little reckless. Tragically, in April 2018, Matthew Mellon died while seeking treatment for drug addiction. His sudden death in Cancun caught everyone off guard. Almost immediately, speculation flared regarding what would happen to his rumored billion in crypto. Press outlets like the New York Times, the Daily Beast, and local news stations began digging into probate filings to see if that fortune would appear on official estate documents. Yet to this day, no concrete evidence confirms the exact location or even the current existence of those alleged XRP holdings. Some estate filings mention assets, but they don't neatly line up with the staggering billion-dollar figure that had been floating around. Nor is there any official public record of safe deposit boxes stuffed with cryptographic keys. The result is a puzzle that still fascinates observers, especially those who follow high-net-worth families and their occasional entanglements with digital currency. Could Matthew Mellon's secret accounts be real, or were they overblown rumors fueled by the hype surrounding his early XRP investments? If they exist, do his heirs or estate managers possess the critical access codes necessary to claim them? Or did that wealth vanish the moment Mellon passed away, rendering these digital wallets effectively unrecoverable? We've seen storied fortunes slip through the cracks before, but often there's a paper trail, or at least public knowledge, of a meltdown. Take the Vanderbilts, for example, who once boasted among the largest fortunes in the United States. Their very public financial spiral is well documented. Opulent spending on Gilded Age mansions, lavish parties, and poor investment choices whittled away the once colossal sum. Everyone saw it happen. That's part of why the Matthew Mellon story stands out. If a fortune was lost or remains hidden, it all happened in the shadows. There's no grand estate sale or public record of financial downfall. It's more akin to a stealth disappearance, reminiscent of sensational rumors around other powerful families who may or may not have stashed money in secret accounts. One angle is to parse Ripple's transaction logs, which might reveal a massive influx or outflow of XRP tied to addresses possibly connected to Mellon. According to blockchain explorers that track transactions on the XRP ledger, it's not always straightforward to pinpoint ownership, especially when wallets can be created and denominated in layers of pseudonyms and passcodes. Estate filings offer another route. Occasionally, heirs are required to list digital assets for tax purposes. But since cryptocurrencies can be moved off public exchanges into private wallets, there's no foolproof method to guarantee a comprehensive record. In this sense, Matthew Mellon's rumored stash may well remain in legal or digital limbo, waiting for someone with the right codes to unlock it. The entire affair calls to mind other episodes of reckless wealth, as some commentators have labeled it. Consider Aristotle Onassis, the shipping magnate who lavished millions on his famous yacht and built a public persona around extravagant displays of opulence. Or the Guggenheim family, which contended with a headline-grabbing imposter scandal, when a distant relative allegedly faked her way into a slice of the inheritance. These stories illustrate that the super-rich, particularly heirs of established dynasties, can find themselves embroiled in outlandish dramas that capture the public's imagination. In Onassis's case, it was the yacht parties and a series of high-profile romances. In the Guggenheim scandal, it was an alleged con artist tricking people into believing she was part of the family. For Matthew Mellon, it's the specter of a crypto fortune hidden behind a fortress of digital codes. Where Onassis flaunted his wealth in plain sight, Mellon, if the rumors are true, opted to lock his fortune away from view, perhaps out of fear that the volatility of crypto markets or potential hackers could threaten everything he had. The internet has latched onto the murkier aspects. Posts on obscure forums or fringe blogs have speculated, without credible evidence, that foul play was involved in Mellon's death. They'll claim that the timing was suspicious or that someone wanted him out of the picture to seize the codes. But reputable news outlets, including The Guardian and The Washington Post, have not found any indication of murder or conspiracy. Authorities publicly attributed Mellon's death to complications relating to his health and addiction, not foul play. Such rumors, while they add a layer of noir to the saga, remain baseless. That hasn't stopped them from spreading online, though. In that sense, Mellon joins a long list of wealthy individuals whose sudden demise invites lurid theories, some of which turn out to be wholly imaginary. Those unverified claims reflect a broader truth. Where large fortunes are concerned, the swirl of speculation is often intense. Earlier in the Mellon family timeline, Andrew Mellon faced unsubstantiated rumors that his philanthropic gifts were hush money to cover up illicit business. Similarly, the 1935 tax evasion scandal, as we've seen, sparked ongoing debates about political vendettas and corporate malfeasance. The difference is that Andrew Mellon's story is well documented in archives and court records, whereas the details of Matthew Mellon's crypto holdings are largely ephemeral, recorded, if anywhere, on a blockchain that doesn't easily yield personal details. Combine that digital opacity with Mellon's tragic death, and it's no wonder people's imaginations run wild. There's also a legal and ethical quandary. If Matthew Mellon's estate can't access the crypto, do those funds truly vanish, or do they remain forever out there, spinning on the ledger as unclaimed wealth? Cryptocurrencies are unique in that once the private key is lost, retrieving the assets is generally considered impossible. They're locked in a state that might as well be inert, with no central authority to intervene. Contrast that with a bank account. If an heir can provide the correct documentation, The bank will eventually release the funds. In a blockchain-based world, no such fallback exists. That's part of what has made this case so compelling. It offers a cautionary tale. While crypto can be a boon for those who want to manage their own money without intermediaries, it also poses risks for estates, families, and anyone who may need to retrieve assets if the holder dies unexpectedly. For the Mellon dynasty, the paradox is striking. They're known for carefully constructed trusts and well-documented philanthropic endeavors, such as the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. The family historically managed real estate and banking assets through formal structures to ensure continuity across generations. Matthew Mellon's rumored stash, however, seems the polar opposite of this approach. Fluid, secretive, and reliant on ephemeral digital codes. It's almost as if centuries of wealth preservation strategy collided head-on with the decentralized ethos of cryptocurrency. While some Mellons might have embraced modern finance, others likely remain puzzled by the intangible nature of digital assets. The result is an inheritance saga that marries old-world aristocracy with the wild frontier of high-tech speculation. Paul Mellon's psychiatric treatment, Andrew Mellon's role as Treasury Secretary, Matthew Mellon's rumored crypto stash, and the lavish estates or philanthropic foundations that bear the Mellon brand. But rarely do we talk about the private struggles, especially the possibility that one of the family's most famous art patrons, Paul Mellon, allegedly underwent psychiatric treatment with none other than Carl Jung himself. According to unverified online posts, Paul Mellon may have grappled with delusions involving flying saucers, a detail the family supposedly worked diligently to hide to preserve his reputation. That rumor alone sounds sensational enough to fill a Netflix series. But once you scratch the surface, the story unfolds in a way that suggests a more complex interplay of secrecy, mental health stigmas, and the Mellon family's relentless drive to keep up a certain public image. Before we dive into the alleged psychiatric angle, let's remember who Paul Mellon was. Born in 1907, Paul was the son of Andrew W. Mellon. Yes, the same Andrew Mellon who served as U.S. Treasury Secretary from 1921 to 1932, influenced Roaring Twenties tax policies, and later faced accusations of tax fraud. He was posthumously acquitted. Unlike his father, who was all about building wealth through banking and heavy industry investments in Gulf Oil, Alcoa, and other corporations, Paul Mellon is best known for his immense contribution to arts and culture. He donated major works to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., co-founded the Yale Center for British Art, and poured resources into the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, among other institutions. If Andrew Mellon made the family's fortune the bedrock of American financial history, Paul Mellon shaped its reputation in philanthropy and high culture. Yet rumors claim that behind that polished facade, Paul Mellon carried deep psychological burdens. The most tantalizing speculation is that he was a longtime patient of Carl Jung, the famed Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst whose theories on archetypes, the collective unconscious, and individuation gained worldwide recognition. Multiple scholarly articles confirm that members of high society, aristocrats, wealthy Americans, and influential politicians did occasionally seek Jung's counsel. But when it comes to specific patient records, details are notoriously scarce. That's partly because of medical privacy, and partly because Jung's personal archives are famously incomplete or restricted. Jung himself claimed to see patients from all walks of life, from modest Swiss villagers to American millionaires, and he generally kept their identities confidential unless they chose to speak publicly. According to certain internet sources, Paul Mellon allegedly experienced delusions about flying saucers and UFOs. If we look at the historical context, Jung did write a famous essay about flying saucers, titled Flying Saucers, a modern myth of things seen in the skies, where he explored UFO sightings as a psychological and cultural phenomenon. Could it be that Paul Mellon's rumored delusions intersected with Jung's intellectual interests in these phenomena? Some internet sleuths think so, speculating that Mellon might have confided in Jung during these alleged delusional episodes, prompting Jung to delve deeper into the collective meaning of UFO sightings. Of course, it's also possible that these rumors misrepresent or overstate mild anxieties or imaginative flights of fancy that were never as severe as the word delusion implies. What we do know from a historical standpoint is that Paul Mellon was known for a thoughtful, even introspective personality. He was not as outwardly flamboyant as some of his contemporaries, say the DuPont heir John DuPont, who made headlines for far more troubling reasons, including the murder of Olympic wrestler Dave Schultz and his own well-documented mental health issues. DuPont's behavior eventually led to a highly publicized trial during which his mental instability became part of the national conversation. The Mellon family, by contrast, has typically operated with a certain code of silence. While Andrew Mellon's legal battles were inevitably public, family members generally kept their personal dilemmas behind estate gates and well-staffed lawyers' offices. If Paul Mellon did indeed grapple with serious psychological troubles, it's entirely plausible that the Mellon machine would have found ways to shield it from media attention. The news cycle in the mid-20th century was far less invasive than today's Twitter-driven gossip sphere. On top of that, Paul Mellon's philanthropy made him beloved in the arts community. He endowed the Paul Mellon Center for Studies in British Art, supported major universities, and donated some of the finest pieces of British and French art to American institutions. The press usually praised him as a patron of culture, a refined connoisseur who took an almost scholarly approach to collecting. His circle included museum directors, art historians, fellow collectors, and occasionally members of European aristocracy. If he had begun ranting publicly about UFOs or revealing paranoid ideas, that would have clashed with the dignified image so carefully cultivated by both Paul himself and his family. Much like the DuPont family's early efforts to obscure John DuPont's erratic behavior, or the Plantagenet monarchy in medieval England, who sometimes kept problematic relatives locked away, wealthy elites have historically preferred that mental health issues remain a private matter. The Astors, for instance, faced scandal involving elder abuse and family feuds, but they too were known for covering up personal struggles to preserve social standing. In the Mellon case, the unconfirmed stories of flying saucer delusions fit into a pattern of hush-hush attempts to keep skeletons firmly in the closet. Now, if you're drawn to solving historical mysteries, you might be tempted to hunt down Carl Jung's patient records or rummage through the Mellon Foundation archives in the hope of finding a smoking gun. However, multiple barriers stand in your way. First, there's the matter of doctor-patient confidentiality, which extends even beyond death in many jurisdictions. Jung's estate and the institutions that house his documents are known to be protective of his private case histories. Second, the Mellon Foundation is under no obligation to release personal data about Paul Mellon's health. Their records likely focus on grants, donations, and philanthropic strategy rather than the personal diaries or therapy notes of the donors themselves. Some scholars have tried to piece together bits of evidence by cross-referencing Jung's published works, diaries, letters to close associates, and interviews, but none provides concrete proof that Paul Mellon was a clinical patient dealing with severe delusions. All we have are occasional references that Jung had wealthy American clients, plus rumors from blog posts and secondary sources with questionable credibility. Nevertheless, the possibility that Paul Mellon suffered from mental health issues is far from far-fetched. Even among the ultra-wealthy, or perhaps especially among them, psychological stress can manifest in dramatic ways. One might compare it to the predicament of British royalty, like Joanne of the Plantagenet family, rumored to have been imprisoned partly because of perceived mental instability, though historians still debate the details. In modern times, people tend to have more empathy toward mental health struggles. But in earlier decades, even in the 20th century, such conditions were often hidden to avoid scandal. For a family like the Mellons, who were used to controlling the narrative around their wealth and philanthropic missions, the impetus to keep any vulnerabilities hidden would have been extremely high. Andrew Mellon's own experience with public scrutiny over tax issues likely reinforced that sense of caution. If the family could engineer philanthropic legacies, arrange elaborate trusts, and shape the story of how old money should behave, it stands to reason they'd also know how to keep sensitive details out of the press. In fact, that's a recurring theme in the Mellon saga: strategic image management. Take Andrew Mellon's tax evasion scandal from 1935, which turned into a very public controversy. Andrew Mellon, once revered as a financial genius and industrial titan, suddenly found himself portrayed in the media as an alleged crook who manipulated the system for personal gain. While he was eventually cleared of criminal wrongdoing, albeit after he died, the incident left a mark on how the Mellons approached publicity. They seemed to learn the importance of controlling the spin, whether it was through philanthropy, curated press relationships, or simply maintaining a tight-lipped stance. The family honed an ability to keep public perception anchored to their charitable deeds rather than their controversies. Paul Mellon, presumably watching all this unfold as a younger man, would have gleaned that the family name and its philanthropic brand had to be protected at all costs. Timothy Mellon's secret Trump funding. Timothy Mellon, whose ties to the Mellon fortune have given him both the means and apparently the inclination to leave his mark on the political landscape. And here's the kicker. He's doing it in ways that echo some of the most covert election intrigues in history, drawing comparisons to European dynasties like the Habsburgs and the Cavendishes. But why? What drives Timothy Mellon to pour a reported total of $65 million into political causes, and why has his name remained relatively under the radar? To understand Timothy Mellon, we have to step back and see the bigger picture of the Mellon family's influence, an influence that goes back to the 19th century. The Mellons rose to prominence through Thomas Mellon, a Scots-Irish immigrant who started out as a judge and lawyer before founding T. Mellon and Sons. By the late 1800s, Thomas's financial savvy positioned the family at the center of Pittsburgh's booming industrial economy. Andrew W. Mellon, Thomas's son, would expand the family's wealth dramatically through strategic investments in companies like Gulf Oil, Alcoa, and Koppers, mirroring John D. Rockefeller's approach to diversified empire building. Eventually, Andrew Mellon served as Secretary of the Treasury from 1921 to 1932, sculpting the tax policies of the Roaring Twenties, an era known for high-octane economic expansion, but also for lopsided wealth distribution. Later, Andrew himself became entangled in a very public tax fraud allegation, though he was acquitted posthumously. For decades, the Mellon name has conjured images of vast philanthropic endeavors, supporting institutions like Carnegie Mellon University, the National Gallery of Art, and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. But as with many dynastic families, not every descendant adheres strictly to the philanthropic or mainstream political paths. The family tree is sprawling, and each branch has its own set of stories. Matthew Mellon, for instance, famously dabbled in cryptocurrency, leaving behind rumors of hidden XRP fortunes locked away in inaccessible accounts. Paul Mellon became a revered art patron, rumored by some to have sought psychiatric guidance from Carl Jung. And now, Timothy Mellon has stepped onto the stage, brandishing hefty checks for political figures in ways that have led journalists, including those at Truthdig, to question what deeper motive or worldview might be driving him. According to Truthdig's report, Timothy Mellon stealthily funneled an astonishing $65 million to Donald Trump's 2024 campaign and to a political action committee PAC aligned with RFK Jr. The Federal Election Commission, FEC filings, back up the existence of large-scale contributions, though the exact distribution between Trump and RFK Jr. can be murky when you consider how PACs sometimes shift funds, pay consulting fees, or distribute resources across multiple races. What's clear is that Timothy Mellon's checks place him in the top tier of individual political donors in the current election cycle. In an age when big money in politics often attracts headlines, it's remarkable how little public scrutiny Mellon himself has faced, at least compared to more flamboyant donors like George Soros or the late Sheldon Adelson. That low profile aligns with his image as a reclusive heir, someone who seldom seeks the spotlight. Still, one question looms large. Why would anyone with deep pockets back both Donald Trump, a figure usually associated with the GOP's populist wing, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who, despite running as a Democrat, has carved out positions that clash with the party's mainstream? Some observers see it as a classic hedge, a way to maintain influence regardless of which ideological camp gains traction. Others suspect Mellon might share specific policy goals with both men, especially on issues like skepticism toward broad social programs, or perhaps a desire to challenge establishment power structures. Truthdig's reporting suggests Timothy Mellon has long harbored strong views against expansive social spending, views that critics label anti-social program sentiments. These convictions could align loosely with Trump's stance on reducing government scope and taxes, and perhaps with RFK Jr.'s unorthodox approaches to regulation and institutional transparency, despite their otherwise stark ideological differences. If you look back a bit further, Timothy Mellon's name has popped up in the news for other large donations. The Washington Post and the Texas Tribune have both documented that he gave tens of millions of dollars toward Texas's border wall construction under Governor Greg Abbott's administration, becoming the single largest donor for that project. Critics pointed out that this philanthropic cum political gesture, funding a border barrier, reflects strong views on immigration and federal versus state authority. Whether you call it a philanthropic act or a political maneuver, it's another instance of Timothy Mellon using his fortune to influence public policy in a highly charged domain. Some analysts compare his behind-the-scenes machinations to the Habsburgs of old, who were known for their clandestine deals and payoffs to maintain imperial power across Europe. Others see parallels with the Cavendish family in Britain, the Dukes of Devonshire, whose quiet lobbying and premiership intrigue shaped politics in the 18th and 19th centuries. In both cases, wealthy aristocratic lineages use their resources to bolster favored candidates or political outcomes without flaunting their role. These comparisons might sound grandiose, but given the Mellon status as one of America's enduring dynasties, it's not that far-fetched. Observers also note that Timothy Mellon's actions bear a certain resemblance to the controversial behavior of historical media titan William Randolph Hearst, who faced accusations of Nazi sympathies before World War II. The difference, according to Truthdig, is that Hearst's questionable alliances eventually exploded in the public sphere, damaging his legacy. Mellon, in contrast, has kept his political agenda largely under wraps. We're unlikely to see him give bombastic interviews or host flashy events. Instead, he quietly signs checks and leverages the tax structure that Andrew Mellon once helped shape, a system that, critics argue, often benefits the ultra-wealthy. It's a system that Mellon's heirs, ironically, remain poised to exploit for their own ends. To unearth Timothy Mellon's motivations, one might look at FEC filings for a full breakdown of his donations, or comb through his 2015 autobiography, which reportedly offers glimpses into his personal ideology. That book, though not widely circulated, has drawn the attention of political researchers who see it as a key to understanding his convictions. Early reviews of the text describe him as staunchly libertarian on economic matters, lamenting what he sees as government overreach and welfare state policies. He also appears to champion the idea that private enterprise and private generosity should address social needs rather than government agencies. Whether one finds that position admirable or alarming depends on where you stand on the political spectrum. Given that Timothy Mellon's pattern of giving wasn't widely publicized initially, many speculate that he intended to keep it that way. After all, once big donors step into the spotlight, think the Koch brothers or George Soros, they become lightning rods for political vitriol. If Timothy Mellon wanted to shape policy without becoming part of a national debate, anonymity would have been his best ally. But in today's digital age, even the most clandestine gifts tend to show up in mandatory disclosure forms or dogged investigative reports. Once journalists got wind of Mellon's large checks, it was only a matter of time before they started connecting the dots between his past statements on public assistance programs and his political contributions. The mention that Timothy Mellon is leveraging Andrew's tax cuts touches on a nuanced point. Andrew Mellon's policies in the 1920s drastically lowered top income tax rates, a measure he believed would stimulate investment and thereby boost overall economic growth. Some historians credit these policies for fueling the decade's prosperity, while others argue they primarily benefited the wealthy. Nearly a century later, Timothy Mellon and many other ultra-rich individuals can still find ways to minimize their tax burdens, channeling those savings into political or philanthropic endeavors. It's a curious form of historical recursion, as though the Mellon family's original championing of low taxes set the stage for Timothy's modern-day financial maneuvering. Of course, not everyone is convinced that Timothy Mellon's political interventions are as sinister or orchestrated as some online commentators would have us believe. Social media posts, referred to as X-posts in the original snippet, sometimes exaggerate his power, implying he's single-handedly controlling candidates behind the scenes. In reality, large donations, while influential, are still just one factor in a complex system. Campaigns need grassroots volunteers, local endorsements, and broad voter appeal. Moreover, PACs typically collect donations from multiple big-ticket contributors. So it's an overreach to say that Timothy Mellon alone is pulling the strings. Nevertheless, it's undeniable that injecting tens of millions of dollars into any race can dramatically shift the playing field. Money is the fuel that keeps modern campaigns running, paying for ads, organizing events, and funding digital outreach. Critics argue that Mellon's donations, coupled with his reported hostility towards social welfare programs, represent a classic example of using wealth to shape public policy. In that sense, it echoes how the Habsburgs kept a grip on power through well-timed financial alliances, or how certain British aristocrats engaged in rotten borough politics, quietly tipping elections through indirect means. The difference is that in 21st century America, We have legal frameworks that require some level of transparency. Without those, Timothy Mellon might have stayed even further below the radar. Then there's the question of how these donations align with the Mellon family's broader philanthropic legacy. The Andrew W. Mellon Foundation remains one of the most significant charitable organizations in the United States, distributing hundreds of millions of dollars each year to causes ranging from the arts and humanities to environmental initiatives. Paul Mellon, as we've seen, was a major benefactor of cultural institutions. Ailsa Mellon Bruce and others in the family also made substantial contributions to museums and universities. Timothy Mellon's approach appears starkly different. His donations are decidedly political, aimed at reshaping policy rather than underwriting the arts or academia. Some find this shift jarring, while others see it as just another chapter in the Mellon family's enduring adaptability, reflecting the personal inclinations of each heir. A deeper look at Timothy Mellon's worldview might reveal parallels to older philanthropic debates. Is private charity or philanthropic money a more legitimate way to solve social problems than government programs? Andrew Carnegie, an earlier Pittsburgh Titan, argued for the gospel of wealth, suggesting that the rich had a moral obligation to distribute their fortunes in ways they saw fit, rather than letting the government handle wealth redistribution. Timothy Mellon's stance might be a modern echo of that philosophy, though channeled into political campaigns rather than public libraries or scholarships. If he truly believes that social welfare programs do more harm than good, he could see his lavish support for certain candidates as a form of rescue mission for American capitalism, what some might call bankrolling a revolution, as the original snippet suggests. Because he's notoriously reclusive, Timothy Mellon hasn't given us many direct statements that clarify his reasoning. In the absence of such a public narrative, speculation flourishes. Some see him as an ideological crusader, determined to dismantle what he regards as an overgrown social safety net. Others interpret his multi-candidate approach, Trump on one hand, RFK Jr. on the other, as a strategic ploy. Perhaps he's simply financing an anti-establishment wave and hedging his bets so that whichever populist force gains traction, Mellon's interests will be served. It's reminiscent of how certain 19th century financiers backed multiple sides of a conflict to ensure they'd remain indispensable no matter who prevailed. One could also argue that Mellon's engagement is part of a larger pattern in contemporary politics, where billionaires like Peter Thiel, Michael Bloomberg, or Tom Steyer step in with staggering sums to shape policy debates. But there's a difference. Bloomberg and Steyer made their names as public figures, even mounting their own political runs. Thiel often appears in the media discussing his libertarian-leaning ideas. Timothy Mellon, by contrast, has avoided the spotlight. The secrecy of his contributions, as noted by TruthDig, was reminiscent of older eras, like the Hearst era, where powerful figures tried to steer public opinion or policy from behind the scenes. Yet while Hearst's flirtation with fascistic ideas eventually became big news, Mellon's anti-social program views remain comparatively quiet. Possibly that's because we live in a time saturated by political controversies, so one more donor with strong opinions doesn't always make front-page headlines. Or maybe it's because Mellon has carefully orchestrated this low profile to prevent a media firestorm. And there you have it, the Mellon family, woven into the fabric of American history through financial might, philanthropic milestones, and a series of hidden dramas that continue to capture our imagination. From Thomas Mellon's humble roots to Andrew Mellon's sway over U.S. tax policy and beyond, This Dynasties narrative holds lessons on ambition, secrecy, and the pursuit of legacy. Whether it's bankrolling grand cultural institutions, navigating scandalous legal challenges, or venturing into the wild frontiers of cryptocurrency, the Mellons have never shied away from bold moves. If their story teaches us anything, it's that colossal fortunes often come with equally colossal mysteries. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to stay curious, dig deeper, and keep exploring the stories that shape our world.